The sprawling estate stretched out like a kingdom, with its manicured gardens, marble fountains, and walls so tall that they shut out the rest of the world. The billionaire stood on the balcony of his new home, gazing across acres of land that now belonged to him. Everything about the property screamed power and prestige. Golden chandeliers glittered inside, glass walls revealed glimpses of priceless art, and rows of luxury cars waited in silence in the garage. It was the kind of life men dreamed of, the kind of empire only he could build through relentless ambition and iron discipline. Yet, as he stood there, surrounded by grandeur, he felt an emptiness pressing down on him harder than ever before. 4 years, he had defined himself by numbers. Profits, acquisitions, skyscrapers that bore his name. He was known for his ruthlessness in boardrooms, the kind of man who could end a rival's career with a single phone call. Respect, fear, and admiration followed him everywhere, but none of it filled the hollowness that grew larger with every success. Tonight, as movers finished settling the last pieces of furniture into his new estate, he realized this house would be as silent as the penthouse he had left behind in the city. The move had been his attempt to escape the chaos of urban life, the endless noise of flashing cameras and journalists who clung to his every step. Here, he had imagined peace, privacy, perhaps even comfort. But even the silence carried a sting. It reminded him of what he didn't have. No laughter echoed in the vast halls, no warmth softened the cold perfection of the mansion. The billionaire had gained the world, yet as he poured himself a glass of aged wine, he couldn't ignore the truth. In conquering everything, he had lost something far greater. The following morning, the calm rhythm of the billionaire's new life was interrupted by an unusual sound. Moving trucks pulling up next door. From his study window, he watched as workers carried boxes, furniture, and plants into the neighboring house. It was rare for anyone to buy property on this exclusive street. Each estate was a fortress of wealth and privacy, and neighbors usually kept to themselves. He felt only mild curiosity at first, assuming it was another faceless millionaire or some heiress eager for solitude. For a man used to dominating headlines and commanding boardrooms, the idea of a neighbor hardly seemed important. Still, his gaze lingered. The movers worked quickly, setting down crates labeled with fragile stickers, followed by pieces of art that hinted at someone with refined taste. Then, as the sun dipped lower, he finally saw her. A woman stepped out of a sleek black car, her presence arresting in a way that froze him where he stood. She moved with quiet confidence, her natural curls catching the golden light, her skin glowing with the richness he remembered so well. His chest tightened, and the glass in his hand trembled as recognition hit him like a strike. It was her. The woman he had once loved so fiercely in college, the one who had shaped his heart and shattered it all the same. Time had only deepened her beauty, adding grace to the fire he once adored. Memories flooded back, late-night talks under dim streetlights, the touch of her hand in lecture halls, the promises they made before life and ambition tore them apart. He blinked, almost unable to believe fate's cruelty or blessing. Of all people, of all places, she was now his neighbor. And for the first time in years, the billionaire felt truly unsettled. It was years ago, but the memory felt alive, as if no time had passed at all. He had been a young man then, sharp-witted, ambitious, already dreaming of boardrooms and empires. She had been the opposite, a woman of quiet strength and radiant brilliance, a scholar who carried herself with a confidence that intimidated even professors. He remembered the first time he saw her in the library, her head bent over a thick law book, her pencil tapping rhythmically as she filled page after page with notes. There was something magnetic about her, something that pulled him away from the shallow laughter of parties and the hollow victories of grades. She was not impressed by his charm or by the wealth that trailed behind his name. She challenged him, argued with him, laughed at his arrogance, and somehow, he found himself addicted to every word she spoke. Their romance grew like wildfire. Long walks across campus turned into secret kisses in quiet corners, late-night debates turned into hours tangled together under the stars. He admired her brilliance, her refusal to bend, her belief in justice, her determination to make her own way in the world without leaning on anyone's name. She admired his drive, his vision, the way he dreamed of building a future so vast it could hold the both of them. They were young, foolish, and unstoppable together, or so they believed. But love had enemies they could not fight. His family looked at her and saw only her skin, her background, her lack of pedigree. They whispered in his ear about legacy, about expectations, about how someone like her would never belong in their world of banquets and board members. She felt the weight of those stares, the unspoken judgment in every room he dragged her into. And though she never said it, he knew it wounded her deeply. The pressure mounted until their perfect bubble cracked. He clung to ambition, desperate to prove himself, while she grew weary of being made to feel like an outsider. The fights became sharper, the silences colder. And then came the heartbreak, the night they walked away from each other, their dreams still burning but their hearts too heavy to carry them together. He never forgot the look in her eyes, the mix of love and sorrow that haunted him long after she was gone. It had been raining that night, the kind of relentless downpour that seemed to echo the turmoil inside them. They stood beneath the shelter of an old stone arch on campus, the world around them blurred by sheets of water. His voice had been sharp, desperate, trying to convince her to stay, to fight a little longer. But her eyes, those eyes he loved, were tired, weighed down by battles she never asked to fight. She had faced the cold glances of his parents, the mocking comments slipped into conversations at dinners, the subtle reminders that she would never be enough in their eyes. She had endured it for love, but love alone could not silence the crushing truth that his world was built to exclude her. She told him she couldn't keep sacrificing pieces of herself just to fit into a life that was never meant for her. Her voice cracked as she admitted she loved him more than she thought possible, but love had turned into a wound that bled each time someone reminded her she didn't belong. He begged her to wait, swore that one day he would prove them wrong, that he would build something powerful enough to erase their disapproval. But she shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. "By the time you're ready," she whispered, "I won't be here anymore." He tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away, leaving him standing alone as she walked into the storm. The sight of her disappearing into the night seared itself into his memory. No amount of success, no mountain of wealth, had ever erased that moment. The echo of her goodbye followed him into every empty penthouse, every hollow victory, a ghost that never stopped haunting him. The first time they stood face to face again was in the driveway between their estates, the air charged with a tension neither of them could ignore. She had been directing a delivery crew when he walked over, his steps steady but his heart pounding harder than it had in years. For a moment, time folded in on itself. He saw her as she was now, poised, elegant, carrying herself with the same quiet strength he remembered, and at the same time, he saw the girl he once held under star-streaked skies. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said finally, his voice smooth, betraying none of the storm inside him. She turned to face him fully, and their eyes locked. It was a single second, but in it lived 1,000 memories. Her lips curved into a polite smile, but it was distant, guarded. "Thank you," she replied, her tone cool, formal. "It's a lovely place." He wanted to ask her everything, how she had been, if she was happy, if she ever thought of him the way he thought of her. But the weight of the past pressed between them, making every word feel dangerous. He noticed the subtle stiffness in her posture, the way she kept her arms crossed, a shield against the possibility of reopening wounds she had worked so hard to heal. "I never expected," he began, then stopped, realizing how foolish it sounded. She tilted her head slightly, her smile tightening. "Neither did I," she said softly, before turning her attention back to the movers. He lingered there, silent, torn between retreat and the urge to speak. For the first time in decades, the man who commanded entire empires found himself powerless, disarmed by the presence of the only woman who had ever truly mattered. Her house, though smaller than his grand estate, radiated a warmth his mansion could never capture. Through the tall windows, he sometimes glimpsed her life unfolding, a home filled with books, music, and the hum of conversation. She had built it brick by brick, not with inherited wealth or corporate power, but with her own hands, her own sacrifices. She was a professor now, known for her sharp intellect and her voice in social justice circles. Students adored her, colleagues respected her, and her name carried weight in ways that had nothing to do with money. The greatest revelation came one evening when he saw a child running across her lawn, laughter carrying into the quiet street. A boy, no older than 10, with her eyes and her energy, racing into her arms as she bent down to hug him. The billionaire's chest tightened at the sight, jealousy and regret twisting together like a knife. She had moved on, built a family, created a world that did not need him. And yet, she looked happier than she ever had when she stood beside him years ago. He admired her resilience. Against odds, against heartbreak, she had carved out a life defined not by who she had lost but by what she could give and achieve. And still, admiration was poisoned by the ache inside him. Every smile she gave her son reminded him of what he had forfeited, the chance to be part of that warmth, that laughter, that love. He had mansions, jets, and more wealth than he could count, but none of it compared to the glow of her home across the fence. For the first time, he wondered if the empire he built was nothing more than a gilded cage for a man who had already lost everything that mattered. At night, when the estate grew unbearably quiet, regret crept into the spaces between his thoughts like a shadow he could never outrun. He had always been a man who measured his worth by victories, hostile takeovers, record-breaking profits, the applause of shareholders. To the world, he was untouchable, the image of success carved into marble. But behind closed doors, the cracks in his perfect facade were widening. No matter how many awards lined his shelves or how many cars filled his garage, the silence reminded him of the one thing money had never been able to buy: her. He would pour himself another glass of whiskey, stare into the amber liquid, and think about the fire in her eyes when she argued with him over right and wrong, the way her laughter used to break down his arrogance in seconds. Those memories were not faded, they were sharp, alive, and they hurt. He had traded her love for ambition, telling himself that he would have time later, that he would build his empire first and return to her once he was untouchable. But later had never come, and now she was here again, proof that life had moved on without him. Seeing her son had only deepened the wound. He imagined what it would have been like to hear small footsteps in his halls, to feel the joy of family instead of the cold satisfaction of acquisition. The boardrooms and the penthouses seemed suddenly meaningless compared to the warmth he glimpsed across the fence. For years, he had convinced himself he was the victor in life's game. Now, watching her thrive in a world he had no part of, he realized he had been the loser all along, and that was a truth no amount of wealth could erase. It happened on a crisp Saturday afternoon, at a charity gala hosted by the neighborhood association. Attendance was expected from every resident, and though he usually detested such small gatherings, he went, partly out of obligation, partly because he knew she would be there. The room was alive with chatter, crystal glasses clinking, and polished smiles flashing under chandeliers. When she walked in, dressed in a simple navy gown that carried more elegance than the diamonds glittering around them, the air shifted. He felt it instantly, and judging by the brief flicker in her eyes, so did she. Fate seated them at the same table, forcing proximity neither had chosen. At first, conversation flowed around them, neighbors discussing investments, travel, and trivial gossip, but the tension between them was louder than all the noise. Finally, a mutual acquaintance turned to her with admiration. "I hear you've been consulting on education reform," they said. She nodded modestly, explaining her work, her voice steady and confident. He listened, struck again by how her brilliance filled the room in ways wealth never could. When the conversation turned toward business, all eyes shifted to him, the billionaire whose reputation preceded him. He offered polished remarks, but his attention kept drifting back to her, noticing the way she avoided his gaze, how her hand rested protectively over the edge of her chair, as if guarding herself from the past. At one point, their hands brushed while reaching for the same water jug. The spark was undeniable, an electric reminder of what once bound them. Yet she quickly withdrew, her expression hardening. The chemistry was there, raw and alive, but trust had withered long ago. They both felt it, the pull toward each other, and the wall standing firmly in its way. It was late that evening when the gala had thinned out, the glittering crowd dispersing into their chauffeured cars. She stepped outside into the cool night air, relieved to finally breathe again. But he was there, waiting near the steps, his silhouette framed by the soft glow of the streetlights. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, as though years of silence had finally become unbearable, he broke first. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly, his voice stripped of all the polish he wore in public. "Not for a single day." She froze, her breath catching in her chest. The words stirred something buried, but also ignited anger she thought she had buried long ago. "Love," she repeated, bitterness lacing her tone. "You let me walk away. You let them tear us apart. Do you know what it felt like to stand alone, to be told I wasn't good enough, not by strangers, but by the people you let dictate our lives?" His eyes darkened with regret. "I was young, foolish. I thought I had to build something first, to prove I could protect you, provide for you. I thought I'd come back when I was ready, when no one could stand in the way." Her laugh was soft but hollow. "You don't understand. It wasn't about money or power. I never wanted what you could buy. I wanted you, to stand with me, to choose me when it mattered. And you didn't." The silence that followed was heavy with unhealed scars. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You can't rewrite the past," she whispered. "And some wounds don't close, no matter how much time has passed." The silence between them stretched, broken only by the whisper of leaves swaying in the night breeze. He stood there, the weight of everything he'd never said pressing down on him, and for the first time in years, the mask of the billionaire slipped completely away. His voice trembled as he spoke. "If I could go back, I would have chosen you. Every time. I was a coward, and I've paid for it every day since. All I'm asking is, don't shut the door forever. Let me try." Her heart ached at the sincerity in his words. Part of her wanted to believe, to let herself fall into the familiar warmth of what they once had. But another part remembered the nights she cried alone, the years she had spent rebuilding herself from the ashes of what they lost. She looked back at the glow of her home across the street, where her son was waiting, where a life she had fought to create stood solid and real. "You don't get to ask for forever after showing up too late," she said softly, but there was no cruelty in her voice, only truth. "I've built something worth protecting. And I can't risk breaking it for a man who once let me go." His chest tightened, but he nodded slowly, accepting the verdict. They stood there in silence, two souls bound by love and regret, knowing this was the final chapter. When she turned to walk away, she paused, glancing back once with a bittersweet smile. "Thank you for reminding me what I survived." He watched her go, the sound of her footsteps fading into the night. For the first time, he understood what true loss meant, not deals, not money, but the love he could never reclaim. Yet even in his regret, there was a strange peace. She had found her happiness, even if it wasn't with him.